Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome to our Noahide Path with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. He's talking today about Noahides and rabbis. He'll probably be starting in the next several minutes. We're just giving time for people to get into the Zoom room, and so I will turn it over to there.
Just like when I was going to Israel, I put out onto my groups, hey, I'm going to Israel if you want to meet. I'll see, how much time I have to meet with you. Same thing going down there when I have an idea beforehand about when I want to go. In order to decide how long I'm going to stay there, I'll see how many people want to meet or what they want to do. And if something works out, then we'll do it and see what happens. That's fine. Okay, I will start to record about 10 after. Do me a favor, Dan, if I forget, just make sure I'm recording before I start. Okay, so Scotty, I saw your emoji for my comments there. I'm just trying to keep you Noahides out of getting into controversies you don't need to get into. We could talk about that privately sometime if you want to, but there's stuff that's been discussed publicly. There's stuff that's been discussed privately also among other people. So some people like controversy. I don't like it. I think it's for Noahides. There's enough problems. Let's amongst ourselves. You don't have to go into the Jewish world and get involved in their controversies. A good example, when I was young, you know, the younger people don't know what this is, but when I was young, you used to have the parents' table and the parents would talk, and the kids just had to shut up and listen to whatever's going on there. They couldn't get involved. Yeah, you're laughing because you know what I'm talking about. You know, kids should be seen and not heard. That was nowadays it doesn't work that way so well, but that's what it was. Let's see, Mr. Contreras, you're a new person here. I don't think you've ever been here before.
I just went back to Zoom and put my account in. I'm Jeffrey. I was just
Oh,
here a
okay.
couple minutes ago.
Okay.
I added my profile picture.
A what?
I added my profile picture.
Oh, okay. No big deal. Lots of people don't want to put their pictures up. They don't want to seem old in comparison to me. They, like the way they look. So I understand that. People are vain.
Yeah,
Baruch Hashem, I look younger than I am, which is always good.
yep.
Okay, so we'll start about 10 after, unless then how are we doing in getting people in the other rooms? Yeah, okay, we'll wait a few because I know it takes a while to pick up there anyways. Okay, so
What
before we
YouTube channel's it on, Dean?
what?
What YouTube channel is it on, Dean? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm still on here, aren't I? No, I see my camera, which is doing my audio for me. It has a green light on the audio, so I can see it's working.
Which Facebook group was it you said, Dan? Sorry. That's for YouTube. Oh, right.
Yeah. Right. Okay, I'm going to start recording right now.
Recording in progress.
Okay. We can just talk a little bit what we're going to do. What we're up to basically now is we talked about in the past, this present unit is the unit on Noahides and rabbis. Probably one of the most important things. What we did is we started out the first class that we gave, discussion group we had, dealt with where rabbinic authority comes from, what it is, how it works, things of that nature, showing, giving an example of how it works even to today. Then after that, the next 4 sessions, what we did is we followed the tradition, the chain of rabbinic legal authority, how it worked, and how we got from a central authority that had one time existed to a dispersed authority, which we have today. Again, this is all underlying background for Noahides to understand, when you speak to rabbis, whatever, where is this all coming from? Okay. Now, there are 2 sessions I'm going to do, at least, dealing with the Hasidic movement and the yeshiva movement, because that's where most of the rabbis who are involved here come from. So you have an idea where they're coming from, because you will see that there are differences, and some of the differences end up being because of what we call hashkufa, the theological background they come from. The Hasidic movement has a certain theological background, which is different from the yeshiva movement and things of that nature. So, I want to do that. But first, I really want to get down to the main question we're dealing with Noahides and rabbis is, who is a rabbi that a Noahide should be speaking to? How are you supposed to figure somebody out? How do you know if this guy is, when they tell you to do something, knows what he's talking about and you should follow it and rely on it, or not? It's a little bit easier in the Jewish world, but the Noahides, because they're coming from a different place, aren't really familiar with some things. So what we're going to do in this session and continue in the next session is we're going to explain, based on the information we already have now, so you have a good, full understanding of how to deal with such issues, who to look for. So that's basically what it is. So today we're going to deal with the issue of what is a rabbi. Okay. Now, of course, every Jew with a beard on the internet is a rabbi, as we all know, but that doesn't mean that they're all equal. Okay. So we need to know when we talk about, this is a rabbi, or if I tell you this is a rabbi, for example, Rabbi Weiner. This is a rabbi who, when he says things in divine code, you should listen to, even if it ends up that I disagree, which eventually we'll get to why I disagree with certain things on there. But even if there's something I disagree with, I could without any problem say, listen, if he's your rabbi who you're following, that's fine. It's no problem, even though I might disagree with certain things that he says, and vice versa. Somebody's following the things that I say based on the Moshe Feinstein stuff. Rabbi Weiner would never say, no, you shouldn't follow that. He's right in what he says, and that's fine. You'll be doing okay. So as opposed to say Rabbi X on the internet, who is teaching Noahides, I won't say who X is, who is telling Noahides that he heard from some rabbi other that this is allowed or that is allowed, but himself doesn't know the subject, that's somebody not. So we're going to go discuss now how you're supposed to know. Now, first thing we have to understand is that Jewish Orthodox men have a certain study that they do, learning in yeshiva. There's certain things that you learn in yeshiva, and this is the background that every Orthodox person has. From what they learned in yeshiva, or after marriage, they learned in the kollel or something. That's what they had from what they learned. Now, we're not talking about conservative reform who have no idea about Jewish law or anything like that you shouldn't be following that. That's a different story. But we're talking specifically about Orthodox rabbis. So if somebody tells you he's a conservative rabbi and talks about Noahide, you should ignore that because most likely he doesn't know what he's talking about. Most likely. So before we discuss specifics about what goes into learning for Orthodox men, and of course is the background of learning that anybody who's a rabbi will have, I want to discuss a little bit about the types of Jewish sources that make up the material that you will learn in yeshiva or kollel, or if you're doing independent study, you're already on that level, that you would be looking at. And then I'll bring that around how it deals with Noahide laws also. Of course, in the classical Jewish sources, the first thing we have to discuss is the Tanakh. And specifically the Torah, as it refers to Noahide laws, it's really the Tanakh itself. Everything that we see later in later Jewish sources will go back to either the Tanakh or a later tradition, a later custom or something that was added on. But even the material that you see in the Tanakh is filtered through the later discussions from the rabbis. Remember, we said the rabbis were basically the judges, as says in the Torah, and they make decisions, and these decisions are what becomes our case law that works on in the future. We don't reinvent everything every generation. It's based on precedent and what's earlier. So, for example, if you in the Talmud, you'll find many times, and you'll see, I'll sometimes say the Talmud says this based on this verse, that the Torah says certain things, and this is what it means as far as that's concerned. Okay. The next, of course, thing is we'll deal with the Talmud. The Talmud has two parts of it. First part is the Mishnah. The Mishnah, as remember from what we had when we were talking about the chain of tradition, the Mishnah was compiled and closed in the third century by Yehuda HaNasi. And what the Mishnah is basically these laws. What were the decisions made by the rabbis where either they all agreed on it or even multiple decisions? So Rabbi X might have said something, Rabbi Y may have said something, the rabbis may have in general said something. And so this is brought by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi in one source. Remember, they put it together because the persecution from the church was such that there was a fear that the disruption that would be to the learning process, to the yeshivas, would be such that they would not be able to keep it. So they had to write it down. This became the Mishnah. Now, besides the Mishnah, there were other teachings that were written down in other books, which are not considered as authoritative as the Mishnah, because Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was very, very careful in the wording. And some of the other sources, one's called the Tosefta, and some of there's just regular teachings that were there that don't appear in other sources, written sources that we have, because they weren't as carefully maintained as the Mishnah was. But all sources are based on views that had been expressed by rabbis in the earlier period of time, based on decisions actually given in their specific areas of influence in the periphery courts. Most of the time, people were in total agreement. Sometimes when they weren't, that's what the Mishnah brings disagreements there. And these, in the second part of the Talmud, it's called the Gemara, is where the Mishnah statements are discussed out. Okay, they're discussed to understand what the principles are there and discuss as far as, well, what is the final conclusion that we have? So the Talmud will very many times state what it said there and explain what this particular case is. Sometimes it will bring another teaching from another place, from a rabbi in the same generation who seems to disagree, and they will try and reconcile it or say, no, we just ignore that one. It's somewhat complicated in the way it is. We find many times in the Talmud there'll be extensive studies on a particular view, and at the end, the Talmud said, no, we rejected that view. So all of this is there discussing in depth these things so that, we know what the views were and what views are accepted and what views are not accepted. Now, all of later Jewish literature basically goes back to the Talmud. So when it deals with legal stuff, all it goes back to the Talmud. On the Talmud, there's some basic commentaries that are important to know. The first one is Rashi. Now, Rashi does not deal per se in any legal issues in the Talmud. Rashi is basically explaining what's going on. So even if you have an opinion there, which is rejected, Rashi, when the Talmud is talking about that, will write to explain what is being said. Besides that, there's Tosfos. Tosfos was from the generation of the students of Rashi, and in general, what Tosfos does is either give alternate explanations to Rashi or point out places where Rashi seems to be differing in different places and try to explain it. Again, the point here is to understand the simple meaning of the text, what the text is actually saying, what these rabbis actually mean. Now, indirectly, this will affect, of course, legal decisions, halacha decisions, because if the decision of the halacha, the law goes following according to that rabbi, how Rashi understands it, or Tosfos, if they all agree on it, that becomes the basis for how we're going to make legal decisions in the future. Okay? So indirectly, Rashi and Tosfos and some other commentaries that exist on this nature go into simple things like the Ritva, stuff like that, which deal with the simple commentaries on the text. And rabbis specifically from the era of what we call the Rishonim, their commentaries are specifically understanding what the text means. They don't have a direct relationship to Jewish law. They have an indirect relationship to Jewish law because their explanation of what a certain rabbi meant, if that rabbi is later on taken to be Jewish law, then that's what they say is very important, whether we understand it according to Rashi or the Ritva. That will come sometime later discussions. Now, we also have commentaries very important that you should know of. We have mentioned these. Remember, when we were talking in the history, we mentioned all these names. These names are not new. There are commentaries that came down, which are legal commentaries, meaning that their purpose is to condense from the Talmud all these discussions, say, okay, what's the final view? In the 11th century was Rif, Rabbi Al-Fasi from Fez, Morocco. He went to the Talmud and he took out and shortened only those portions which deal with the Jewish law. In the 13th century in Europe, there was somebody called the Mordechai ben Hillel, who was martyred in one of the Crusades. He did the same thing. His work is a little bit smaller, but it also appears there basically what how in Ashkenaz in Germany they held. Following that is Rosh, the late 13th to 14th century, living in Spain. He wrote one on the Talmud. He has, again, a commentary, which is basically distilling what the Jewish law is. And in the 14th century, we have the Rabbi. I mention these because these are the main ones that will come up later when we deal with the Shulchan Aruch, how that came about. Okay, these are the ones that are the primary sources that were made that's distilled what we call today the code of Jewish law called the Shulchan. Then we have other different kinds of commentaries on the Talmud, which are important to know. These are what we call Chidushim on the Talmud. And what it is basically we see, say, a rabbi says something one place, or a rabbi says something in a different place, trying to reconcile those together. Or we see a view taken as a law here, a view accepted over here, trying to reconcile them together when they appear to be different. And they try and discuss difficulties in the text. It's not directly related to the simple meaning of the text. It's sort of doing a little bit of a higher level. But again, that's very important in the long run. People look at that to understand what's going on in the Talmud. Now, besides the Talmud itself, there are other things which came, again, afterward. These were works that came out, Sforim, books on the commandments in the Torah. The Talmud tells us there's 630 commandments. So a number of works came out explaining what these 613 were. The earliest one that we know of interest today is called from the Rambam, Sefer Mitzvot, the Book of the Commandments. That came about in the 12th century, early 12th century, I believe, if I remember correctly. And that's a fundamental work of the commandments. He writes what the commandment is, a little bit about what it is. In Europe, remember the Rambam was in Sephardic, in the Muslim lands. In Europe, in the Christian lands, in the 13th century, there were two works. One was called the Sefer Mitzvahs Kudo, the other called Sefer Mitzvah Kudan. The big book of the mitzvahs and the small book of the mitzvahs, basically the same thing. Explaining the mitzvahs in the Torah, explaining which they are. Again, a slightly different reckoning of what the 613 commandments are. And finally, in the 13th century, we have the Sefer Chinuch, was written in the 13th century in Spain, and that is also a compendium. It's pretty close to the Rambam. There's some minor differences there. I mentioned this also, it's important because in the 19th century, there's a work called Minchas Chinuch, which is a commentary on Sefer Chinuch, and there he goes not only in the Chinuch, but he also brings many legal decisions from it. We'll find later Shulman and he's from the Rambam, there are different things in there. This is just on the commandments. These, of course, sometimes have a relevance to Noahides because the Noahide commandments, many of them are similar there and relate to Jewish, what we find in Jewish law. So Jewish commandments. So it's in there you find some discussion of them. Next, we have what we call the actual codes of Jewish law. These were compendiums that tried to bring together the Jewish law as it is into a single place in order that we should know what they are. Primarily the Rambam in the 12th century was the earliest one, followed by in the late 13th, 14th, the Torah, which was also done in Spain, by Rabbi Yankov, who was a son of the Rosh. And his format of dividing the laws into four different categories was later taken up in the Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century and was followed basically after that from almost all the works that run on the subject. Again, these code of law, if you're learning in yeshiva, these are things that you will learn. Okay, we're going to discuss how people learn in yeshivas, but these are the material. This is the basic source material that is learned in yeshiva. And any rabbi that you see on the internet who calls himself rabbi should have a familiarity with most of the information, the Talmud and the codes of law. If he's more of a person who is in learning, he will have a familiarity with some of the codes that exist and some of the sources, commentaries on the Mishnah. Now, Lubavitch, they put a very big emphasis on learning the Mishnah Torah from the Rambam, which is his code of law, and the Sefer of Mitzvahs, which is his thing on mitzvahs. That's unusual in the whole Jewish world in general. So you will find, for example, Lubavitchers will be more familiar with this, but they may not be as familiar with the other sources. And so if you're speaking with somebody from Lubavitch, you have to make sure that they know, you want to know that they have the fully rounded learning, which is necessary to deal with Noahide laws. Reasons will come up to. Following that is what we call the response literature. The response means that rabbis were asked questions and they were answered. This goes back to the period of time of the Gaonim, who lived in the area of Persia, which had been Babylonia, where the yeshivas were, which is a central authority until the 11th century, after the fall of the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael around the 4th century or the 5th century. So in that time, everything moved essentially to Babylonia. That was a center until the 11th century, when the yeshivas there were closed, when the Seljuk Turks came around, and that period of time basically was in a state of flux, and all kinds of stuff were happening then. We talked about this in history, but all kinds of stuff was happening until the Ottoman Empire brought stability, and things started to improve in the area. But that's how. So the responsibility goes back to the time of the Gaonim, and it continued in Europe and in the Sephardic lands, where people would write questions to rabbis and yeshivas, and they would give answers on it. Many of these were theoretical. Most of the questions were practical, dealing with Jewish life and stuff like that. Sometimes they were theoretical questions on the Talmud. There's all kinds of different responses. I have a number of responses in my bookcase here that are very important. Okay? And so that's basically the literature that anybody who went to the yeshiva system is familiar with, depending on how far they went in the shiurim or when they went to kollel. They would be familiar with more of them, some with less, but essentially, those boys who go through yeshiva to the ages, they will That's the course of study. That's what you expect any rabbi to have known, have learned at some time. I have a certain kind of familiarity with that stuff. If you run into somebody, a rabbi on the internet, and it appears he doesn't know, the Talmud or something like that, then, you should be very leery about following this person's advice because their knowledge is superficial. Okay. And so, okay. The other thing I mentioned on the other session I had, but I mentioned also here, there's a bunch of secular literature discussing various issues from a scholarship point of view, dealing with Jewish law. These have no standing as far as, in rabbinic and Orthodox discussions of the subjects. Okay. I've found Noahides in the past who've read certain works like that and have thought that they can use some of that to help them in understanding, but the truth of the matter is that's not the case. That's not where we draw our understanding. That's not where the rabbis were knowledgeable in the subjects. So if you look through the Divine Code, you will not see one single footnote citing a secular source because they have no standing as far as our traditions and how we go about deciding on Jewish law. So that's basically the textual material that a rabbi is required to know. Obviously, there's a lot of it. So some people know more, some people know less. In the yeshiva, that's where in the period of Gaonim, to be called a Gaon, you had to know the Talmud backwards and forwards, to the point that if you were asked about any issue appearing in the Talmud, in any place, you would have to have the answer. If you didn't have the answer, you could not be called a Gaon. Okay? And it's very important to understand that a title such as Gaon, it exists in order to differentiate and let people know somebody who is knowledgeable. Because in essence, a rabbi is somebody who knows about the Jewish law, knows what it is, knows the Talmud, is learned in Torah. Okay? It's not really the same thing as a pastor. But let me take a break now before we go to the next section, and I will entertain any questions. Dan, if there's anybody who has a question from either the YouTube or Facebook, that's fine. And if any of you have questions, raise your hand and we'll try and explain it. Compliments. I don't care about I don't hear about the compliments. I want to hear the questions. If somebody doesn't like what I say, that's fine. That's also it's important to have comments. I do try and explain it, but it's very important because remember, as Noahide, you're coming from a Christian background, most of you, and because of that, a lot of what I'm talking about, while it may seem sort of understand, you don't really understand it. So, for example, if you take an average boy who went to, like, for example, I have two grandsons, okay? My oldest grandson and my second, okay? They're both after bar mitzvah years. So they will have familiarity to a certain level of what we've been talking about. They're both already learning the Talmud with various commentaries. We're going to talk about, next little section here is going to be actually talking about the different methods of learning Talmud, but they're already to that type of level, okay? If they came on here and talked about Torah, you'd think that they were rabbis, but they're not to that level yet. Okay? So it's important to understand such a thing like that. This is fundamental background for any Orthodox Jew, okay? Now, I'd like to mention something that you might not be aware about also, is that in general, Orthodox Jews, especially the Jews, Hasidim, whatever, do not go on the internet. Okay. Now, I've been involved in the internet because I've been involved in counter-missionary work. My rabbi allows me to do this, but in general, you will not find somebody like me on the internet having permission to be there because of because of they're being involved in spreading Judaism. Okay. So in general, so when you find people here in general, except for Lubavitch, which is much more lenient about that. If you find person in general, you could probably assume that they're probably not the most learned people. They can be very nice people, whatever, but usually they're not that, because people who are very learned spend their time learning. Okay, being involved in counter-missionary work, my learning, what I do, has become less because of the kind of work I'm doing, bringing Jews back to Judaism, more involved in missionaries. Those of you who might know me from there know exactly what I'm talking about. Those who don't, that's fine. I wear different hats, depending what it is. I mentioned before that the way I got involved with Noahides is because I've been involved in over 30 years countering missionaries, and while my emphasis was always with Jews, I would constantly be coming in contact with non-Jews. With my website, I have non-Jews who actually read that, and non-Jews would come to me who wanted to know what to do. And in the beginning, while I had a good background of learning, I didn't know the information, and I spent time learning what the information is, and then that's how I got involved more in Noahides, because basically people came to me about it. And now I'm just more and more involved. Okay, Dan has a question, so I guess I'll let the question come up. Dan?
Yeah, Rabbi. Earlier today in the previous session, you had mentioned a comment about the Noahide laws being more individual and personal relevant. My question is, how come the sages have not put out a Noahide community blueprint? I use the word blueprint meaning some sort of game plan that's condoned for Noahides to develop communities. It's almost as if there's a restriction against communities, and we get clearly not allowed to make a new religion, but even under rabbinical auspices, if you will, the only way to grow as a community is for like-minded people to be in the same vicinity and happen to meet each other. Other than, this modern age, we can do this online stuff. So my question is really, how come there's no blueprint that's authorized?
Okay, I think we have two issues here. The first thing is that what you have to understand is Jewish literature was written for Jews. That means the audience is Jews. They have certain backgrounds, they have certain things. One of the problems that exists, and we're going to discuss about it more in the next session, I think. I'm actually writing an essay right now, which I hope to publish within the next few weeks, on teaching Noahides, which will deal also somewhat with this type of an issue. So, the literature that we have here and everything like that is basically written for Jews, dealing with Jewish life. The actual amount of material in the Talmud, which deals with Noahides, is probably not more than 10 pages. And if you take in consideration that the smallest tractate in the Talmud, among the 66 tractates there are, the smallest one that I know of has 21 pages. You can see how, basically not part of the mainstream part of knowledge. It's a part of Torah, and so because it's a part of Torah, it appears there, and that's very important to understand, because it means that, when we talk about Noahides, when someone talks, it is a part of Torah, Noahide, but it's not a part of the main part of this. The main part of Torah is with the Jewish people. And I'm going to be giving a unit on the Tanakh and Noahides, Torah Noahides. And if you look at the Tanakh, it's the same way. The Tanakh is almost exclusively about the Jewish people, but there are some things that deal with non-Jews. And because non-Jews are part of the world, obviously. But the main emphasis of the Tanakh is basically about the Jewish people. And there are things that talk about, for example, the book of Jonah is one of the important examples of what I'm talking about. But, essentially, so it's not the main part of the study. So that's the first thing you have to understand. It's only a small part. Secondly, we have to understand that when you see in the Talmud, being a Noahide is an individual thing. There's no class of being a Noahide. A Noahide is just a non-Jew who is following what they're supposed to do. Okay, so the classification of a Noahide is basically a non-Jew. That's what it is. But a Noahide, what we call a Noahide today, is basically a non-Jew who is trying to fulfill the Torah and what's supposed to be. But it's looked at as being an individual thing, not a group activity. So the few instances we find, the one I usually bring by is the Chidduv. Chaim Yosef David Azulai was a rabbi from Jerusalem who went to Italy and met a non-Jew who was a religious person. They discussed about it, and he explained to him that in Judaism, what they say, if a non-Jew follows the 7 laws, and then he will be worthy of a place in the world to come. That's what it is. But it's something on the edge of an individual. About 40 years or so, a lot of non-Jews Christians started leaving Christianity. They recognized the truth and the holiness of the Tanakh. They wanted to still have an attachment to the God of Israel, but they left Christianity. So they started to join together as this, making what we call the Noahide movement, but that was never understood. So essentially today, what goes on is there are theoretical laws as far as the Noahides, which are basically for individual, and now we're dealing with groups of people. Now the problem with groups are, which you sort of pointed out, the problem with groups is that once you make a group, the group has a tendency of building a fence around itself and perpetuating itself as an organization. And that sometimes, or in most cases, we see either it'll collapse or it'll develop into its own cult or religion. Okay, that is a very serious danger that everybody sees about it and is trying to avoid. Okay, one of the purposes of Noahide Path is to deal with certain paradigms that Christians who left Christianity and now are trying to be Noahides bring with them, to bring them to understand what is the type of paradigm in your life you're supposed to have as a Noahide, as opposed to what that is, and that should be able to help so that these things don't happen. But that's a different story. So again, what's happening now with we see groups developing whatever is essentially because there are just so many people, and it's easier to deal with people, as a group, and people try and identify and work together. Not sure if that answered the question completely, Dan, but since your hand is up, you can.
It points in the right direction. Thank you, Rabbi. I do have one question from someone on YouTube, if that's okay.
Okay, let's answer the YouTube question. Who's it from and what's the question?
Questions from Linda Hill on YouTube, and she says, how was it decided that the sages were chosen for the Jewish people to follow? And then she cites a couple.
Okay, Linda. The first discussion in this unit, we discussed rabbinic authority and how it worked. Essentially, it's a meritocracy based on your showing and proving that you are knowledgeable. Okay? That's basic what it is. The Jewish people by themselves choose out those people who are the most knowledgeable. I mean, we see this. I don't know if I mentioned before, but Josephus, when he talks about how the Pharisees, the people who follow the Pharisees, it's because the people recognize in them that they were the most knowledgeable about the law and the traditions of the Jewish people. And that has continued until today. Okay, we have no body which votes somebody to be a rabbi who's accepted over the world. Take somebody like Moshe Feinstein, who I follow. Nobody sat down and voted, oh, he's the guy we're going to follow. What happened is he became recognized from his, what he says and what he answers and what he writes, his greatness in Torah, that he became accepted as an authority in America, certainly. In America, he was considered the most authoritative rabbi by all the groups together. Not that some different groups didn't disagree with some of the things he said, but that, if you look for somebody who was the rabbi for America in his time, he would be considered the rabbi of America. Okay? It's a meritocracy. You show people that you know what you're talking about, and then people will listen to you. Okay? That's just basically the way it is. Okay, I hope that. Yeah, no, I see Scotty's hand up. I just want to make sure that I've answered that question completely for Linda. I'm trying to push off Scotty. He asked 2 hard questions for me. He makes me work. Okay, Scotty, I guess I have to let you talk.
Okay, I got 2, and if you don't want me to ask the second one, I won't. So, just on the clarification of a Noahide seeking a rabbi or a rabbinic authority, if I can say it that way, in searching for one, just for clarification, they need to be knowledgeable in where to lead the Noahide and where not to lead the Noahide. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, and my answer is not going to be satisfying. That's actually what we discuss probably next time.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll
I'm going to
leave that alone then.
And it's very important because there's a lot of factors in having a rabbi. Okay, there's a lot of different factors. Okay, not just because of knowledge. There's a lot of different factors. We'll talk about that. Okay. So, but that's going to be. We're not going to get into that until the next session.
So that is an invitation for everybody to come back to the next one, correct? So
yeah. Okay.
So question number 2.
I could always end this on a cliffhanger. Like
I know that's
it's sentence say, okay, you got to come back next month for me to finish my sentence. No, I could always do that. But no, listen, I try and complete certain things, and if you come, you come. If you don't come, you come. I'm not interested. I'm interested in helping helping as many people as I can, but I'm not interested in, oh, wow, I have 500 people who are listening. That stuff is not interesting. Yeah. If I have one person who listens and I've affected and changed their life, that's also very good.
Okay, you ready for question 2?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I this is on top of Dan's question about community, and so I just want to, a lot of Noahide, I get asked a lot of questions about community, and so I'm just going to ask you what is a Noahide community? Is it where we move into a place away from the world and like-minded people, or is my community outside my front door helping the people around me regardless of religious or political affiliation?
Oh, that's a deep question. Again, the reason why is because it's hard to answer that question without all the units are going to come after this. Okay? Fundamentally, the Jewish people were set apart from the rest of the world. They had a function that could only be accomplished by maintaining themselves separated. Meaning we have to have communities. We have to, for example, okay, kosher food. Okay, I'm planning a trip to go to Houston, Texas. Before I go to anywhere, I have to make sure I have food that I will eat because I'm a religious fanatic and I don't really trust anybody with food. Unless God comes and tells me it's okay or whatever rabbi, no, it's not going to work that way. So it makes it, so there's a lot of things you have to do. Whereas you don't have to worry about it. They have a McDonald's there. You can eat there. It's no big deal. Okay. That's, so there's a difference and it's a fundamental difference. So there is a necessity of community. You cannot be an Orthodox. So for example, when people want to convert, the first thing they tell them is, how far do you live from a Jewish community? And if you don't live by a Jewish community, they say, well, we can't really get involved in conversion because you have to be part of a community. Okay. Again, that's one of the reasons why Noahides don't, some people who are non-Jews don't convert and become Noahides because they can't, their life situation is just not possible to do it. So, that's what it is. Where Hashem puts you, that's where he puts you. So that Noahides don't have that. There's no necessity to live together. The concept of community for Noahides has only come about because of the situation today, that there are just so many people who are Noahides, and they're living within communities and areas, and there's both the psychological need and the practical need of people to work together to make it easier in their life. So that's what's building up communities. But the problem with communities, of course, is that being a Noahide is not based on a community. It's based on you as an individual. Your job is to, go out and make the world a better place. obviously work together, the community can make the world a better place better, like with charity. One person putting together $5 a week, say, for charity purposes. I'm saying $5 a week if you're really a cheap person, you don't have much money, whatever. But if you're a wealthy person, $5 is like nothing. But, so you put aside a certain amount of money a week. So at the month, if you put $5 a week, you have only $20 a month. And at the end of the year, you have only $250 to work. But imagine what happens if you have 50 people doing it. So you have $250 a week, and you have $1,000 a month. At the end of the year, you have $12,000 a year. And that's a significant amount of money that can be used to help people. Okay? So in a sense, these things that Noahides are really supposed to be concentrating on, things that make the world a better place. That is, community in a sense helps with that. But you shouldn't consider yourself a community in the sense that you are separating yourself from the world. No, your community is because it's going to make it easier to go and make the world a better place, working together. Okay? And again, we're going to come into it again. The purpose of Noahide is to make this physical, this real world a better place. The Jews have a spiritual thing. The Noahides have this world. Their spirituality is making the world a better place. Helping old ladies cross the street. An old lady, is trying to take her food and packages to her car and it falls down, going and helping her pick it up. Any kind of thing that you do to help another person is part of your job, and what your focus should be is thinking, how can I do something to make the world better? How can I do something to do something better for somebody else? That is really what the Noahides' emphasis should always be. How can I make something better? Because most of the laws are very simple. I mean, I don't think anybody here is contemplating murdering everybody or going down and robbing the local bank or a grocery store or anything like that. I should hope, God forbid, not, or considering, sexual relations with their next door neighbor's wife or something. I don't really think that, there are too many people who are going to be in the audience who are actually contemplating such things seriously. If you are, you should definitely not be contemplating. That's not allowed. But, most of the things you are doing, you believe in God, and may say some things about God and such like that we can talk about, which might be a little bit more helpful. But there's really not much that you're already going to be doing anyways, because your background, even as being a Christian, puts you already in a position which you accept these things already. Okay? Now, if you've been totally from an atheist background, it might be a little bit more difficult, some of the things that are here, because they're contrary to some morality that comes from the edge. But those who came out of Christianity, already you have some of this background from there. So the main things that you should be worrying about is really those, which is how to make the world a better place. So in that sense of communities, what I don't think is, for example, I know that there's some communities that they get together and have community prayer. Prayer has nothing to do with Noahides. Okay? God wants to hear from you as an individual. He doesn't care about a group of people. You're not, the Jewish people as a whole get together to pray because the nation of Israel is considered as a whole. When I talk about Torah and Noahides, I'm going to talk about some issues about the Tanakh and how you look at it. So I want you to see certain things that you may not have seen before. The Jewish people is a community. Okay? And Noahide is not a community. Noahide is an individual. You may come together as a community, but you're still in the end an individual. Okay, did that answer your question? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Okay, let's go to the next part. Unless there's another question, let me pour a little bit more water. Now, we talked about the material. The question is, okay, I see all this material. How is it done practically? When somebody goes to yeshiva or goes in kollel after they get married, as many of the men do, what do they learn? How do they learn it? What it is? There's different ways of learning it. So I want to familiarize yourself with that. And let's take, for example, we'll talk about my two eldest. I have two grandsons who after bar mitzvah. I have three after bar mitzvah. So I talked about two of them specifically now that I see a lot more. Okay, so we're going to talk about what they learn daily. Okay, what's a daily? They have a what we call a shir, a class in the morning. They have a class in the afternoon, and in the evening they also have something. What they learn there is usually different. Okay, so let's discuss what it is. The first type of learning is what we call Bekias. Bekias is when you learn to learn a lot of material. The Talmud, there's a lot of stuff in the Talmud. So how can you learn it? There are ways you learn it. You try and learn as much as you can. For example, maybe people might have heard, if you've seen Jewish groups, they have something called Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is you learn one page of Talmud a day, and you finish the Talmud in 7 years. That's called Bekias. You learn it. Your learning is basically what it says in the Talmud, and you probably look at Rashi to understand what it simply means. But just simply, what is it saying? This rabbi says this, rabbi says this, oh, this is the final opinion. These are what the arguments are. And just, you cover a lot of time, a lot of space. Okay? You're not going into it very deeply covered. Okay? Now, my grandsons, that will be what they learn in the afternoon. By the afternoon, you're pretty tired. You can't, go into things very deep. But in the afternoon, you learn what you call your Bekias shir. And you'll probably take out one tractate and you'll complete the whole tractate. It could be 100 pages, it could be whatever. You learn that in one period of time. And that's the key issue. You learn for a lot. Okay, so that's basically usually what the afternoon session is in yeshiva for a boy. Okay, so the rabbi you're going to speak to, he's probably learned a few tractates like that. Okay? Next is what we call Ian, learning in depth. What that is you have a shir. That's usually your morning shir when you're sharper. And that what we call the Maggid shir, the person whose shir you're in, whose class you're in, gives a lecture where he discusses the Talmud, but goes into a lot of discussions, not just Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi and Tosfos you learn by the time you're 13, 14, you've already learned Tosfos. Start getting a little bit older, you learn a lot more commentaries. Okay, so you have a shir where you learn a lot of commentaries, or maybe it's the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva who gives a shir. For example, my Rebbe, the Hasidic Rebbe who I follow, he's actually the Rosh Yeshiva. So he gives a shir 2 or 3 times a week to the whole yeshiva for the older boys. Very deep learning in the Talmud. He'll discuss an issue and he'll bring all kinds of different places, going in to have a really deep understanding. And that involves not learning very much. You might have learned maybe a page in a few weeks. Okay, you learn other commentaries, understand very deeply all kinds of issues. And what you're learning here is not just learning what the Talmud says, but learning how to learn, how to understand, how to put together these ideas into a way that you can understand what the Talmud is trying to get at. Okay, it's a method of learning. I mentioned it once before, is that when you go to yeshiva, you're really learning how to learn. So that for the rest of your life, if you're somebody who sits by learning, you will be able to go greater and greater. And essentially, that's what these rabbis who you go to, like in Moshe, they went that way, but then it's go more and more in learning. They learned how to learn, and they keep learning and learning and learning, and they go deeper and deeper and deeper, and have more and more knowledge of the text. Okay, so that's the morning shir. It's geared toward there, and you learn other commentaries, which are deep. Shu is very common. Yam Shel Shoima. These names you haven't heard about because I haven't mentioned before, but these are very common. They go much deeper into text, ask questions on it, and give deeper answers so that your mind is able to delve more into the depth of the Talmud to understand it, so that you become more capable. You begin the skills in order to really learn the Talmud at a higher level, which is required for after you get married. You have to do it, learn at a higher level. Okay. Now, there are some yeshivas that Brisk is one that I know that has a type of learning in Ian called Pilpul or Chedushim, that they learn really in depth in a certain method. There's certain methodologies. It's very hard to explain what it is, but they have certain methodologies which they learning different in depth. And it's called the Brisker derech. But again, that's just to learn Talmud, just to get the depth in order to basically a certain way of looking at the Talmud in order to delve the depths of the Talmud. Somebody who's learned the Talmud for many years sees a certain beauty in it. There's a format, there's a thing, and the arguments back and forth, there's a logic, there's a depth in the understanding, the subtleties of the arguments that are there. And, but it takes many, many years of learning until you can actually have that kind of appreciation. Okay, so that's the pilpul, that's another thing. Now that's learned very commonly in kollel, and sometimes in certain yeshivas, especially the Litvish yeshivas, that's basically learned in the upper classes. Boys who say 18, 19, 20, just before they're getting married, stuff like that. Hasidic boys get married younger, Litvish boys get married later, so Hasidic boy by 20 is usually married, but a Litvish boy can be married 23, 24. That's in that period of time. Or in the kollel, they learn it in these sometimes in these types of methods. And then finally, there's another thing: the learning for Jewish law. There are some kollel. I happen to have gone to that kind of a kollel, where the course of study is to learn for halacha, for Jewish law. What does that involve? It's a type of learning be'iyah. You learn it deeply, what the text is, but the deepness of it is trying to learn what is the Jewish law that comes out of that text. Okay, so what you do is, for example, and I'll give you what our method of learning was. It usually took a few weeks, but the subject matter was basically, you'd probably have a few pages of Talmud to learn. After that, you would have, of course, obviously Rashi, we'd learn Tosfos also, but then there's a whole mixture of legal commentaries, like I mentioned, the Rif, the Rambam, and Rush and the Ran. I mentioned those also because, so you would learn, instead of learning some commentaries, certain types of commentaries, which were just the depth of Talmud, you'd be concentrating on those commentaries whose purpose is to bring out the Jewish law. Okay, so you have a thing, so say you're learning a certain topic, it could take you like a few months. You'd learn the Talmud in depth, understand it with these things. Then you would go in to see what the Rambam says on it, understand where the Rambam's come from, what it's from. Then you go into the Tur Shulchan Aruch, look at the Tur and all the commentaries and what later people are writing about different issues that came up on this subject, again for the depth. And then you would go to the Shulchan Aruch, so the Shulchan Aruch said, by the time you get to Shulchan Aruch, since you've seen the early stuff, you pretty much know 95% of what's going on. But sometimes there's other issues that come up, that questions later on. And so you have a whole full thing. And then you might look in some responses works. Somebody said, I remember one year learning Muksa. Mixes is like on Shabbos, what you're not to do, to hold, or actually with some certain things about the holidays, what you're allowed to do on holidays. And I looked at the response for the Moshe Feinstein, which is very interesting because it seemed to disagree with what they told him. Whatever, interesting is not what the point, what he says, but that this is a method of methodology of learning. Okay, now it's very important to mention many people don't learn this, but for me it was very important because once I started to learn about the Noahide laws, I applied this methodology to my learning. So, for example, there's about 5 pages in Tractates and Hedron dealing with the subject Noahide laws. I would learn that with Rashi, Tosfos, those commentaries which explain it, which have a point towards halacha, Jewish law, and following through in the same methodology that I do to then go into the Rambam to understand where they're coming from, what's going on, different issues. And then there's a whole list of response literature and stuff like that. We're going to discuss next time the works that are specifically discussing about Noahide law, so you know some of the things that are going on. But this was a methodology that there is. So that's the main methodology. Now, I mentioned the morning and the afternoon classes that my grandchildren would learn. I forgot to mention in the evening, what they usually have is a seder, an order, a class that they're going either in Jewish law, to pick out some area of Jewish law to learn, maybe the laws of tzitzis, maybe the laws of tefillin, various kinds of things like that they might take, or they might have, in the daytime, a short amount of time they're going to Hasidic works. A lot of boys get up early in the morning before prayer, and they learn something. Then they'll have either reviewing stuff. So that's what goes on in yeshiva. Okay. Now, anybody who's a rabbi, who's Orthodox, who's gone through it, they've gone through to certain levels all this kind of stuff. Okay, or you should expect them that they've done that. So, again, that's what we're talking about. Okay, the base is what is. Okay, let me stop here for a minute, and then we will get on to the next thing is what is a rabbi? What is a rabbi today? Okay, so if there's any questions, Dan, of course, is going to be first question. Let's have your first question. Yes, Dan.
Okay, sorry, Rabbi, I had to unmute. I got a couple off of YouTube. The numbers have shot up. We've hit about 110 viewers already. Simon DeSanta says, Rabbi, do Noahides have the role of being in the field like Esau, when it comes to making the world a better place?
Well, I wouldn't say that Isaac made the world a better place. He wasn't such a nice guy. This week's Parsha, shows that he wasn't very nice to the Jewish people who wanted to go into the land of Israel, and he didn't let them go. So Isaac is not considered a very positive role model for anybody. But essentially, yes, the purpose of the Noahide is to be part of this world primarily. I've pointed out in Yiddish, we have a saying that Yenem's Gashmias is Dan Rochnias. This other person's physical needs is your spiritual needs. And that's a very big truism for Noahide. Other people's physical needs is really your spiritual development, your spiritual needs. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't pray to Hashem when you need it. We'll discuss about that later on in other units. But as a focus, your focus has to understand that your spirituality is based on your doing things in the world. Whether it's a small or large, people think that, well, if I can't give $10,000 to help something, what is it of value? That's not really what it is. Hashem looks at the heart. And that is the same thing with Noahides doing things. When it comes to charity, you do what you can. And whether it's small or large, it doesn't really make a difference. I tell this story all the time. When I was very young, many years ago, when we used to trudge through the snow to school and we used to go in the horse and buggies, we have to watch in the street, very, very long time ago, for almost all of you. I'm much older than I look. So I used to, as a little boy, before Bar Mitzvah, a few years before Bar Mitzvah, I think it was, I had a next door neighbor, an old woman, and I used to water her lawn. I had a job. I would water her lawn. She'd give me, a small amount of money, whatever it was. That was my allowance. And one of the things she did, every once in a while, I would go to her on Sunday, and in the Jewish community gets sent a lot of envelopes to give charity. So I would sit down, and I think every check was like 10 cents that I wrote, whatever it was. She would collect them and put them down, and I would write for her, because now I understand when you get older, your handwriting doesn't look as good as it did when you were younger. So I would, print out to so-and-so and so a check for $1. For each and every one, she put $1 in and send it out. Okay? Of course, I would make 10 cents on each one, which is fine with me. But now I realize, as I get older, realize how really a phenomenal that thing that was. This woman probably gave hundreds of dollars to charity, $1 at a time. Imagine what each one of those is a mitzvah. Okay, so imagine how many mitzvahs for $1. Okay, and so if you're thinking about, but what am I? What's my dollar? My $5 for charity? That's not the point. The point is once you get involved and you understand that you're making things better. If you want, you put aside a charity in the box, and maybe once a week, once a month, whatever gets to a certain amount of money, you give a charity to the organization in Israel, an organization in America, or maybe once a month you go down and help people who are homeless, or you volunteer for something. Whatever it is, that's not what the point is. The point is your focus is on how do you make the world a better place. And it also becomes an advertisement for Noahides. I mean, you do it because your job is to make the world a better place. But it also becomes an advertisement for the Noahide life, because if somebody asks why you're doing it, say the God of Israel says, as a non-Jew, my goal is to make the world a better place. I have to be in the world to make this world better. That will advertise to other people what it means to be a Noahide. Much better than, prayer groups and Torah studies and stuff like that. Again, I'm not saying that's not what we're supposed to do. I'm saying, but your emphasis has to be on making the world a better place. Okay, Dan, you said you had a few questions. Oh, okay. Any bad comments that I have to comment on? Because there is no place in any Jewish literature which refers to Noahides as Orthodox non-Jews. Why do I use it? Because everybody knows what an Orthodox Jew means. You're a Jew, but you're Orthodox because you're doing the commandments, what Hashem wants from you. And a Noahide essentially is a non-Jew who is doing what Hashem wants you to do. It's really just as simple as that. It's something I coined. Maybe I'll trademark it, so every time you use it, you have to give me 10 cents. I don't know, make a little money on it. But it gives you an idea of what we're really talking about here. Okay, being a Noahide means that you're a non-Jew. You're not a Jew. You're a non-Jew, and you shouldn't be thinking of being a Jew, or well, if you want to convert, of course, you could be thinking of being a Jew. But hey, listen, if you like your McDonald's, hamburgers or pepperoni pizzas, and you can't live without it, hey, listen, whatever, just eat it and have me in mind. When you're enjoying it, and say, this rabbi can't eat it, but I can. I love it, just because I know he can't eat it. Okay, but
Rabbi, I got a question from Michael on YouTube. Michael says,
Yeah.
Rabbi, can you name at least one religion that would survive in a world with no Noahide laws at all? I really can't think of any because civilization would die.
Okay, let's put this. Most of the Noahide laws, okay. Actually, this is no. The laws of murder, theft, and sexual morality are basically universal. However, for example, homosexuality was not such a thing that was forbidden universally. So we can't really say that. As far as murder, abortion, homosexuality, for example, in ancient Greece was considered the norm. Not like today. It's not like the gay movement. It wasn't like you were oriented like that. But male relations, older men with younger men, was actually considered somewhat of a norm in ancient Greece, if you're familiar with that. As far as murder is concerned, infanticide, Rome and Greece was very common, and there's other places where infanticide was common. So we can't really say that it's totally universal. Okay? In India, I understand that widows at one time, when their husbands died, they were killed together with them. That's also murder. So you can't really say that, well, the concept is universal. The actual implementation is not universal. Okay? We can find many, many different cultures just on those three alone. Okay? A limb from a living animal is I don't know of any place where that's really considered such a taboo. So you've now got four. Cursing God, I don't know. That's a toss-up, possibly. But idol worship, clearly there are many, many places in the world where they do worship more than one God, and they do sacrifices, so they would be violations of that one. And the laws of justice, I think most places have justice, but I don't think they have it in the sense that we understand the Noahide laws as having implications of many other things that are not explicit there. So, for example, honoring your parents, which is part of making the world a better place, is not there. Doing kindnesses to people. Many religions, especially Eastern religion, are very extremely dualistic in that they reject this world completely and don't take part in this world. Their priests are like, totally separate from the world. So that's considered the ideal. It's not everywhere. I understand the Sikhs, very interesting. In their temple, what they do is in their temple, they give out, everybody that comes to that temple, they feed them. Part of the temple service is actually feeding people. It's a wonderful thing. Very much in tune with the Noahide laws, is that anybody who comes to the temple, they come down and they give them a meal to eat. So if you're ever in Kashmir, in the area there, and you want to go to a Sikh temple there, which they are monotheistic, by the way, so it's like Muslims, you can go around there, there's not a problem with that. And they serve meals. It's very interesting. But in general, no, the Noahide laws are not what we consider natural laws. It's not something that everybody follows naturally, okay? If you're from a Christian background, a lot of this stuff is so familiar that you think, oh, well, that's just natural to people. In fact, all over the world, it's not that way. So I can't really say that all the religions of the world really follow that, okay? And certainly other animist religions and stuff like that, I don't think they follow that either. Okay, Dan, does that answer that question? Okay. Are there any more questions? If not, we're going to do the final section for today. Speak or forever hold your peace. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so nowadays, okay, we've talked about learning what happens. So what does it mean to call somebody a rabbi? Okay, what does it mean? What does it really mean? Okay, so let's discuss it. Originally, until the late 4th, I think it was, or the early 5th century, there was something called samicha. Samicha was something that was only in the land of Israel. It involved somebody who was learned being given samicha based on their knowledge. And the person who gave it had been given samicha beforehand, and going back in a continual generation to generation, our belief is that, our tradition is that it goes all the way back to Moses. Just like Moses anointed, gave smicha to Joshua, Yeshua, and then it was given from generation to generation until it goes down to the 1st century. Okay? So that's what it was. It was based, again, on meritocracy and what they knew. After that was stopped, there was no smicha. Okay? How was somebody considered an authority? Again, it was a meritocracy. Just like I mentioned, the Gaonim knew to answer anywhere in the Talmud. A person who was knowledgeable, who knew everything, had learned to know everything, it was somebody that you could go and ask a question of, and they could answer. When the yeshiva in Babylonia in the 11th century was closed, and it became dispersed in both the Muslim lands, which we called the Sephardim, and the European lands we called the Ashkenazim. They had people who were knowledgeable. They had no official, giving of anything, but they were knowledgeable, and they, decided. Rashi never got smicha, by the way, because there was no smicha in the time of Rashi. Rashi was just very well known, very knowledgeable. People could see from what he wrote, and they realized he was knowledgeable. And so he was considered authority based on meritocracy. In the 14th century in Germany, apparently somebody gave somebody a letter saying that, I know that this person is knowledgeable, and that is from where smicha came from. That he was given a letter saying, I know this person knows what he's talking about, so that's, you can rely on him. And that was called smicha. Eventually we gave the name smicha. Now, the Jews living in the Sephardic lands were strongly opposed to it. And the reason why is because smicha has a meaning. And the meaning was that it was something that was by tradition. It ended in the 5th to 6th century. There is discussions in Jewish literature how we can rejuvenate it, resurrect smicha. There had actually been, in later years, was actually an attempt to do that in Tzfat, in the, I believe it was the 16th century. It didn't go anywhere. It requires all the rabbis in Israel to anoint somebody, say this person is the most knowledgeable person here, and we accept him as having authority of smicha, as if it was back to Moses. And then this person would give smicha to other people. Rabbi did that in the 16th century, but it never caught on because rabbis in Jerusalem didn't accept it. And so it died out. One of the people, by the way, who was given smicha was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, He was one of the rabbis who was given smicha at that time. It's an interesting part of Jewish history, not really relevant. But smicha came about in that time, basically to say this person knows how to render decisions in Jewish philosophy, knows what's going on. Now, again, even according to this, it's not like a pastor. A pastor, you go and they teach you how to pastorise and to, there's a formula of how to pray and how to do this and all kinds of stuff. That's not what it is. Smicha is only one thing and one thing only. It's to say this person knows what they're talking about, and you should listen to them. Okay? Now, smicha, when it was introduced, we're going to discuss eventually what it was from, but originally there were two types of smicha. One is we call it individual smicha, and there's people nowadays who get that also, by the way. It's not uncommon, especially in the Hasidic world where I come from, and if somebody wants to get smicha, they do what's called individual smicha. They will go to one of the big rabbis who is very knowledgeable, say, hey, listen, I want smicha from you, please examine me, and he'll be examined. Okay? Individual. There's also what I call institutional smicha, meaning that if you go into the best example is, for example, at Chabad, because they send out so many shluchim all over the world, these people have to be capable of answering certain questions. So they have an institutional kind of smicha. People take a smicha program. I think it's a 2-year program. They take a test afterwards, whatever, or they sometimes go to other people take it. And with that, they get smicha. So they can go out and say that they're rabbis from us. Okay? But that's what it is. Originally, it was always individual smicha. You would go to a certain rabbi. Certain rabbis are given. So for example, my Rebbe doesn't have smicha, but for example, his grandfather has smicha from the rabbi from this city and the rabbi from that city were very big scholars who said that this person, and based on who it was who said it, that's based on how accepted it would be. Now, today, when you talk about somebody getting smicha, the basic meaning of that is they've passed a test on 3 subjects. So you'll see online they have a lot of these programs which are institutionalized some things. Doesn't mean the person going through the program. Many people going through the program are absolutely totally ignorant of Talmud. They just learn this stuff and answer the question for the test. It's one of the reasons why I don't really consider that very highly. But what basically is 3 different things, 3 different categories. Okay, in the second part of the Shulman called Noahides, the first thing is called busa b'cholav, which is mixtures of meat and milk. As you know, Jewish people are not allowed to eat cheeseburgers because they're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. There are one section of Noahides discusses the laws involved with that, somewhat complex, somewhat difficult, but that's the first part you learn. The second part is called teruvas, or as I would pronounce it, terivos, which deals with mixtures. If something that is non-kosher becomes mixed with something that's kosher, what happens, how you can deal with the question of how you can make it kosher if it has happened. All these things are discussed in that section. And the third section is called malicha, which is salting, meaning what you have meat, which is kosher, which has been slaughtered properly. How do you make it kosher? It takes out the blood so that you can eat it. Those are the 3 things. So you study those 3 things, and you pass a test on it, and that's where you can get the basic level of smicha. Doesn't mean that you necessarily are very learned in Talmud or very deep knowledge in Talmud. It just means that you pass that test. Okay. Now there are other smichas that you can get, which are very common today. One of the most common one is on the laws of Shabbos. I have one of my sons actually learned through the laws of Shabbos very deeply, and he passed the test on it. He was tested on it, and so he's given smicha in the laws of Shabbos, so they can answer. It's a very, very popular thing to do. Now, a lot of people in yeshivas go through the yeshiva system, and they will learn smicha because it's like a goal in learning. If you're learning just Talmud to learn more and more and more, it's not really like a goal. You don't really have an objective you're reaching to. But if you take, a certain time out and learn deeply into the laws that for getting smicha, you get examined, you've sort of had a certain accomplishment in your life, so essentially you're a rabbi. So I know rabbis who were car service drivers and rabbis who were bus drivers and rabbis who work in the diamond district and stuff like that, or businessmen, something, who did it because when the yeshivas, they wanted a goal in their life to do that. Okay. Again, the title of rabbi applies to them, but that doesn't mean that that's somebody that you go to ask questions of Jewish law in the day-to-day basis. Okay? So laws of Shabbos, some people do that. That's very good to do also. It's a type of learning. And then there's a law called Yad and Yadin, where you learn business law, section Kosher Mishpat it's called. And that's for people who want to be involved in the Jewish court system, the Beis Din system, either on the Beis Din or appearing for the Beis Din. Okay, these are different things that are there. And anybody who does that, technically they can be called rabbi, even if they're not a big scholar. You'll see them called rabbi also. But there are other people in the Jewish world, the rabbinic world, the Hasidic world, Orthodox world, that are given the title of rabbi also for other things that are doing. So, for example, Hasidic rabbis are called rabbi. The Rebbes, for example, my Rebbe He's also the Rosh Yeshiva, or Yeshiva for the older boys, and he gives classes. He's called Rabbi, but he never got smicha. But he's a very big Talmud Chacham, recognized all over the world as a very big scholar in Torah, and he gives very high-level classes. And he's called Rabbi because that's just the way it's done. He's somebody who's of authority in the rabbinic Jewish world. Okay, if you're rabbi in yeshiva, as a rabbi in yeshiva, how do they accept somebody to be rabbi in yeshiva? Because you can't be a rabbi in yeshiva teaching in yeshiva unless you have a degree of knowledge, skill, and knowledge. And of course, your personal life has to also fit up. So people who learn to teach in yeshiva are called rabbi. That's what it is. But we have, of course, many of our gedolim, many people who actually paskin halachas, who did not have smicha at all. So, for example, one of the most important rabbis of the 20th century I mentioned was Chazon Ish. He was one of the main rabbis in the city of Bnei Brak. His influence, even today, is very, very great. Whenever you see certain things, let's say this is according to the Chazon Ish's view, it fulfills his view. If those people want to be restrictive, themselves will follow, because it's generally more strict on things, will follow the view of Chazon Ish. But he never had smicha. The Chafetz Chaim, or Mishnah Berurah, very well on Chafetz Chaim, he was a Rosh Yeshiva, but he never had smicha. He got smicha because he wanted to travel and get his passport. So Chaim Oizer, another famous Rosh Yeshiva, wrote him a letter of smicha, so he should have it, so he, whatever. But he never had smicha, because smicha is not does not say that you are knowledgeable enough to tell somebody what the halacha is. Smicha is just because you of certain things. To be able to tell somebody something is that those you're knowledgeable and known to be knowledgeable of the subject. That Moshe Feinstein became the rabbi, essentially the rabbi in America, because he was known to be the biggest authority overall in America, and it was accepted by all the communities. Even though there's certain things we disagree with him about that, and the Hasidic communities disagree about certain things, some things were lenient, but in essence, respected by everybody, looked upon as, yeah, he's like the rabbi in America. Now, with all this said, this is just, somebody who can be called a rabbi on the internet, whatever, and you see a lot of them. So when you speak to somebody, you want to know, well, what makes you a rabbi? Were you recognized, did you teach in yeshiva? You recognize as somebody who's knowledgeable? Or you just passed the test? Or what, you want to know how much they know, because that's going to be very important. Now, as far as Noahides, there is a very simple, very difficult problem here. There is no smicha on Noahide laws. Okay? So how do you know that somebody knows something? Because you've talked to him. So, for example, Dan knows about this. He's very close to Rabbi Cherky in Israel. I've gone to speak to him a number of times, and we discussed Jewish law. So he gave me his work with Shalom on it, and he wrote a very nice thing to me. And he wrote Haraf Agun in front of my name as a recognition of my knowledge in this specific area. But there's no place that tells you who knows him. Rabbi Blumenstiel knows him, Rabbi Weiner knows him. We've talked with them in Halacha, so they both recognize. So how does because you recognize from what you know. Rabbi Weiner is somebody who's very, very knowledgeable of the subject, and also a very fine person. And you can see his knowledge from Divine Code anyways. So there's no yeshivas, no specific training. A person who is knowledgeable to answer, to be authoritative in Jewish on a Noahide law, has to have learned the material specifically to a certain level. Okay. Now, next time we're going to discuss about that. When we talk about specifically rabbi who should be listened to, but essentially, in order to be somebody, you have to know that person has learned this stuff deeply enough that you can rely upon what he says. Because I'm not saying necessarily what he says is wrong. What I'm saying is that unless you're discussing with somebody who knows it, or maybe second can ask somebody like who has the depth of knowledge, then you have to be very careful, because what they say may be true, may not be true. You have to know where it is. So we're going to discuss next session a little bit more about this issue, but it's just something to keep in mind, that you should okay, does this person have the qualifications, or he just looked at the Rambam, he knows it from there, whatever. Or Maybe he's just looked at the Divine Code book and he's saying what it says in there, but he doesn't understand where the Divine Code is coming from. That's also not acceptable. It's almost like looking in the Shulchan Aruch and say, well, the Shulchan Aruch says this, and so without knowing what is going on. We're going to talk about this next time a little bit more when we talk about who to listen to. So it's you, in order you want to find somebody or have access to somebody or a source of somebody who has the in-depth knowledge and has learned all the kinds of works, who can answer you how to do it. Next week, I'm going to give a good example of something which requires a knowledge that is not found in the Divine Code. It's not found in any of the works, but it involves a knowledge that you have to be knowledgeable about Jewish law to answer. And if you can't answer questions like that, you should not be a Noahide teacher. I mean, you could teach certain things like that, but you should not, put out your shingle. Hey, you can ask me questions. Okay, we're going to end here with this, and we're going to start taking some more questions because I already see some hands are up. Next time, what we're going to do is we're going to actually go into specifics of how do you choose a rabbi for yourself. I gave you some information now, but we'll go into a little bit more next time. Okay, Dan, I'll let you start first, and Veronica's after that.
Okay, yeah, I got a couple from Linda Hill on YouTube again. She first asks, when does a rabbi learn Tanya or Kabbalah? Sorry for the spelling. She says also, can Noahides learn those info?
Okay, number one, first of all, if you're a Lubavitcher, which I'm not, it's different than if you're not a Lubavitcher. In Lubavitch, they teach from almost the beginning, I don't know, maybe Bar Mitzvah, I don't know when they start learning in Tanya. Okay? As far as Kabbalah, as far as I know, in Lubavitch, they don't learn Kabbalah. As far as outside, this is going to be something that's going to shock you, okay? The learning of Kabbalah and Tanya is not universal, okay? There are people who do learn Tanya. I've learned Tanya 10 plus times, I think. Don't remember. Because it's a classic Hasidic text. I learned Kabbalah because I had a rabbi who taught me, who himself was a Kabbalist. He came out with a work. They came out with a work of his teaching called Sifsei Chaim, which is doing stuff like that. I was one of his close talmidim. In general, people learn Hasidic works, but Tanya is considered one of the more difficult works, so it's not learned universally. If you're from the higher level of Hasidim, people who are more knowledgeable, then you will have learned it. But in general, that's not learned outside of Chabad. But again, there's a lot of people who do learn it outside of Chabad, but it's not considered common. The more common universally learned Hasidic works outside are like Kadishas Leibit from the Bedicheva. But when you talk about Hasidic rabbis, I'm actually mentioned some of those works that are commonly learned. Okay, as far as Kabbalah, there are some Hasidic groups that are more Kabbalistically inclined. Zidichai, Hassan, their works are very Kabbalistic. You find people learning Kabbalah more often there. Again, most of the rabbis have learned Kabbalah, but it's not a general subject. It's not an subject because basically it involves both a lot of background to learn it. It involves personal piety, I guess. I hate that word, but that's really the only word in English I can think of that's like that. And it also needs a guide. Okay? You cannot learn Kabbalah if you don't have a guide, and guides choose people out because they see them as somebody who is, worthy of the subject. So as far as Noahides, Tanya and Kabbalah should not be learned, period. For two reasons. Number one, it clearly goes under the category of those things which, since they're both Kabbalistic in nature, are outside of what's allowed to be taught to Noahides, about to learn to Noahides. And even without that prohibition, on a practical level, the kind of knowledge you need to have as a basis of background in order to learn such subjects is way outside the reach of any Noahide that I know of today. Okay, so it's just not, these are not subjects to be taken lightly. If you don't have the background probably doing Kabbalah, and I've seen it out there from Noahides who have taught Kabbalah, that what they teach is basically heretical. They have no clue what they're talking about. So it's just something to stay away from. Not worried, but it's not necessary. In the Jewish world, it's not considered a necessary type of thing to learn. So why should you think as Noahide is something necessary to learn? It's not in the Jewish world either. Same thing with Tanya. Tanya is not considered something necessary. In Lubavitch it is because it's one of the fundamental texts. So I can understand that. But outside of Chabad, it's not a fundamental text for anybody else. Okay, Veronica.
Okay, and easy. Sorry, I forgot where my mute was. This an easy one for you. So a lot of Noahides, they follow certain rabbis or whatever. Is there an official way of following a rabbi, or do you just listen to them? Is there anything that you have to ask? Do you have to ask them if you can follow them? You know what I'm saying?
Number one, there is no official thing, anything. That is, of course, one of the big problems. Number two, what you can try and do is, for example, I mean, if you ask, for example, if you ask Michael Shulman, if it's all right to listen to me, what I say, he's going to say yes, because he knows me and he knows that I know what I'm talking about. And if you had Rabbi Church, he would also say yes. Again, we do disagree, by the way, on certain things. So don't, disagreement among rabbis, if you've gone through the last, 4 units, you see that, things spread out and some disagreements came in. And, some of these things are valid, and some of the stuff that the reason why I talk about some rabbis is some of the things that I disagree with is that rabbis who don't know what they're talking about will say to do things which are absolutely wrong and not allowed. Misunderstanding what they're supposed to do, misunderstanding the implications, the difference between theoretical to practical. We're going to talk next time about the difference between theoretical and practical, and you'll see what I'm trying to talk about, okay? Or saying they can do certain things which lead to cult-like behavior among Noahides. Things that may be technically allowed, but you shouldn't do even though you're allowed to do it because it's leading towards cult-like behavior among Noahides. We'll talk about that. These things are going to come up a lot because there's a difference between what theoretically might be able to do and what you should be able to do. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. I mean, I could dress like a Hasidic rabbi with colorful, my Beckish could be colorful, and I could wear all kinds of things like that. And, I could do it. Nobody would stop me, but I'd look like I'm a Michiganer because it's just, that's not, I'm not that. Okay. And the same thing you have to say, there's Noahide. Yeah, there's certain things you could do, but you shouldn't do it because it's just not for you yet. Maybe it won't ever be for you. No, that's just, you have to understand it. Judaism and Jews among Judaism understand these things. Noahide do not at the moment understand these things. And that's one of the problems. And many of the problems get fed by people who discuss, certain things, well, maybe theoretically you could do this, okay? So they talk of theoretical as if it's a practical thing that Noahides can do. And when Noahides hears, like even in books, you see, a Noahide could do this, okay? It appears in the book, and you have Noahides read that say could mean that they should do it. Or something not, so the difference between what theoretically is allowed might be allowed and what you should do is different in practical. And that's one of the things I want to discuss. And that's one of the important things in Noahide path is to get you to understand that just like in the Jewish world, there's things that you might be able to do, but you shouldn't do it because that's not for you. In the Noahides, you also understand that there's some things that you may be able to do, but you shouldn't do it because it's just not for you. And you shouldn't feel insulted about it because in the Jewish world, it's the same way. The overwhelming majority of Hasidim that I know of do not learn Kabbalah. I am actually a exception to the rule because I had a rabbi who became my mentor and taught me what I'm supposed to learn in order to look at it, taught me things so that I could learn it. Okay. But that's the exception to the rule. The overwhelming majority of Orthodox do not learn Kabbalah because they don't believe that's for them. They don't understand it, and they know if they learn something they don't understand, they could come to have beliefs that are just wrong. It's as simple as that. And Noahides understand it's the same thing. There's things that, theoretically you probably could do it, but you just shouldn't do it because it's just not for you. It's like this thing's just not for everybody. Okay. Okay, Veronica, understand the
Well,
point?
that that wasn't really my question, so I probably just misspoke. Um,
Okay.
so
Let me
it's much
pontificate on
simpler.
another subject then.
It's much simpler than what we were talking about. Okay,
Okay.
so John Doe has been listening to this particular rabbi, for a year or so, and he wants him to be his own rabbi. He wants to commit to listening, to learning, that kind of thing. Does he contact that rabbi and say, will you be my rabbi? And that's kind of basically what I'm thinking. Because in Christianity, um, I don't know that people really followed a specific pastor. They usually followed a church, I think. So anyways, that was kind of more of my question is, how do you approach a rabbi to ask them to
Okay. First
be?
of all, the Noahide world is not really organized in such a manner. And I hope it never gets organized in such a manner, because that's going to lead to cult behavior. And that's something that has concerned all of the rabbis I've spoken to, that it could develop cult behavior, which eventually, after a few generations, spins up into a new religion. That's definitely not the way to go. As far as choosing around a rabbi, I really do want to discuss that more next time, because I'm going to discuss certain things that build up to that. So that you understand when you're speaking to somebody, is this somebody you can take for you? But in general, the idea is since there is no organizational foundation, and since the people who are qualified have never gotten together yet and saying, okay, how can we make this easier for Noahides to find somebody to speak to when they have a question, and how to do things practically, set up some kind of a organizational type of thing for such things like that. It's difficult on the day-to-day basis. So what you want to do is nowadays what you want to do is you want to find somebody who, as we're going to discuss about next, is knowledgeable and qualified, and somebody you like, and something like that. We'll discuss about it the next unit more. But again, it's a difficulty that exists. It's one of those things that are difficult to exist, and it's difficult to exist, and it leads to a problem that we have that's concerning with many rabbis, is that the Noahides as a movement should not split into things and start making themselves into like a cult organization, which will eventually devolve into a religion of its own and have defeated the purpose of what the people who are following the Noahide laws have wanted to do with their lives. Okay, we don't want that to happen. We want people to do what Hashem wants in the proper way, and not to make their own religion. I mean, let's put it this way. One thing I found in this city, many people like to be leaders. You should always be leery. If you have a desire to be a leader, you have to fight that. Like any other inclination, you might have to do something. You should always fight the inclination to be a leader. And if it happens, if people make you something and you don't really want it, you get pushed into a situation, you should look at it as something that you really feel bad about. And you would rather it not have been that way. You'd rather somebody else to have been there to do what you're doing. Okay, it's very important to understand it. But there's a lot of people I've run into who like to be leaders. Okay, they like to have people follow them. They might have been pastors beforehand or something like that, so they didn't, that drug of having people follow them. They still have that. Okay, it's also part of an old paradigm. It's also, you have to look at yourself and understand: am I doing this right? Am I doing it because there's nobody else can do it? I'm trying to fulfill something that nobody else can do, and I'd rather have somebody else do it and just retire from it. Or am I doing it because I just love it? I just love it, and I love this. So you have to look at it, okay? And it's a problem. People are human, okay? There's a lot of people I've seen Noahide classes. I mean, well, we can knock the Ger movement here. There's no problem. I know the people in the leadership of the Ger movement. They like to be leaders. They want people to follow them. So, one way you can see that somebody wants to be a leader is how they criticize people who disagree with them. If you see somebody criticizing people who disagree with them and not being able to accept somebody who has a different view, because you understand that their different view comes from sources and is legitimate, then you know that that person really wants to be a leader. He's not really interested in the subject itself. He just wants to be a leader of people. But if you see somebody who it doesn't bother them if somebody else has a differing opinion and people are following them because that differing opinion is valid, then there's, that person is somebody who's, qualification, I guess. We'll talk about it more next time. It's really, we want to get into certain specific. I haven't given some of the information that is necessary for you to make a decision. What I just want to do now is understanding when you see somebody on the internet who says he's a rabbi, you want to know where it's from. What's up? How knowledgeable he is. And especially you want to know, we're going to discuss about this more next time, what does he know about Noahide law? Because that's really what's important. Being an Orthodox person, even having smicha, does not necessarily mean you know anything about Noahide law. Okay, that's what we're going to discuss about more the next time. Is that helpful, Veronica? I hope it is. Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, Rabbi Daniel Lopez there in the group asked in the chat, he says, is there any guidelines on using Safaria.org? Like, can you give any weigh in on that?
I don't use Safari. I have almost all those texts to begin with anyway, so I don't need to go to there to look at it. They do have English translations of some things. I mean, their Tanakh may be okay. Chabad has also a Tanakh translation. It's more or less okay. For Noahides, I always recommend the Archwell translation because it is not only, it's a decent translation, but also it's geared around translating the text where difficult wording, they resolve the wording based on Rashi's commentary. So you basically get an Orthodox Jewish understanding of a text because they deal with issues. When you always translate from one language to another, it's always problems. So the way they resolve their problems is following Rashi, how Rashi understands it, resolving those translation difficulties so that it comes out according to the way Rashi understands things. And so that's why I think that the Archwell is the best Tanakh for Noahides, because you'll basically get a good Jewish view of it, and you'll see the contrast, of course, with the Noahides, with a Christian, the Christian background is. That answer the question or whatever? Again, I don't know Safaria. I don't know what they use because I don't use it myself. I think in the last 6 months or a year, I may have looked at it once because somebody mentioned something there and I want to look and see what it said. But in general, I don't use it. I have, the Gemaras, I have almost all the Midrashim in my collection because I got them because of my work in counter missionaries. Yeah, I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at Safari. It may be, of course, useful, but I can't really say anything about that specifically. Ron is shaking his head. Ron's saying I shouldn't look at it.
There's some that are quite controversial, isn't there, Scotty?
Oh, it is controversial? I don't know. You have to accept it. I don't live in the English-speaking world. As far as English, Jewish, I have very few things that I deal with. The only things I get in English are things that I'm looking there to try and help me to teach people that might be in English. I can say, hey, this thing. There were many years I gave private classes in Hasidic works. So I've got a bunch of things in English on Hasidus, and none of them are really acceptable to me. It's because they're usually written by people who have no clue what they're talking about. So, there's not very much things in English. All my stuff comes from, the original languages, basically. Okay, if there's no more questions, I think we can give it a wrap. And next month is August. I'm not sure when in August we're going to have it. We'll have to take. We'll
Excellent, Rabbi. Yeah, it looks like we've reached about 167 people so far on the stream, which is good, between YouTube and Facebook. I haven't checked the one page yet, so there might be more. So very informative for sure, Rabbi.
Okay. And again, next session, we're going to actually get down to the nuts and bolts of rabbis. I mean, fortunately, we do have a couple of good examples. Rabbi Weiner, Michael Shulman is always in contact with Rabbi Weiner. So if there's a question that comes up, he has somebody you consult directly. So that's a good source. Rabbi Blumenstiel is basically, he's retired from it. It's very hard to get a hold of him. And there's a lot of issues. We can talk about that because we'll talk about that next time a little bit, because Rabbi Blumenstiel is a very good friend of mine. We have been in contact from time to time. He's embarked on different projects in Judaism that he's involved in. And Rabbi Turkey, I know also, we've also discussed him. So we can discuss next time. Other things.
Awesome.
Okay. I guess if there's no more questions, either here or on the YouTube, I would just make one pitch to those people who are on YouTube or on Facebook now listening. It really is nice if you can come here to the Zoom session, because once we shut the Zoom session down, sometimes we sit around and talk for a few minutes. This is private conversation, which is just for the people who are here. And I asked Daniel to shut that off. So just an incentive for people to come here and get some more personal discussion.
Okay, do you want?
Okay.
I'll shut the stream off, Rabbi.
Okay. And I'm shutting off my thing right now.
Recording
give me
stopped.
60 seconds to shut it down. All right, folks. So we're going to wind down the Noahide Path session on Noahides and Rabbis, but join us for the next one. We'll let you know of the date, and it'll be more involved on selecting a rabbi, I believe. So till then, have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.
Is Rabbi still there? I'm still here. I'm just looking at a message.